Welcome. Thank you for joining our emergency town hall on the extremely dangerous case of Donald Trump. For those who do not know me, I am Dr. Bandy Lee, forensic psychiatrist, violence expert, and editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. I'm also president of the World Mental Health Coalition, which is sponsoring this event. My co-hosts today are Leonard and Mark. Please be advised that this session is being recorded. The events of January 6, 2021, which Senator Chuck Schumer called another day of infamy, have starkly exposed the dangers of this presidency. They exposed him as clearly mentally unbalanced and a threat to our safety as well as our democracy. Over the course of the day, we were flooded with messages stating, "You warned us years ago." As clearly foreseen as this moment was, this sad, frightening, and horrific chapter of our nation's history was tragic for its predictability and preventability. Even though we identified over 4 years ago how extraordinarily dangerous Donald Trump would be in the office of the presidency, and as grateful as we are to have come together to speak up about it, we were hampered. Our greatest obstacle in meeting our duty to society ironically came from one mental health association that chose to use its clout to protect its status and to grow in power under this administration by silencing professionals, using the misguided interpretation of the Goldwater Rule. However, the dangers are not over. Today, we will discuss, from a mental health perspective, what urgent interventions are necessary to contain the dangers here and now. What steps do we urge Congress, government officials, and the major media to take at this unprecedented time of national crisis? Why is it imperative that Donald Trump be removed and contained with only 13 days remaining in office? And why is it critical that Donald Trump and his top enablers be held responsible and accountable for what they have done? And so we look forward to hearing your questions and a lively discussion after each of the presenters give their 5-minute presentation. Attorney Richard Painter will be moderating. Mr. Painter is former Chief Ethics Counsel to the Bush-Cheney administration, professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, founding board member of Take Back Our Republic, and former chair of CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Richard, may I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mandy. I'm going to ask you to introduce each of the speakers for the 5-minute sessions that you have selected here. We've rearranged this schedule on a last-minute emergency basis to reschedule for today as opposed to this weekend because of this crisis that our country has faced, because we see what happened yesterday in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building. That the psychological instability of the president of the United States has consequences, very serious consequences for our country. And the psychosis spreads, and it spreads among his followers and then to others. And the notion that violence is an acceptable means of resolving civil disputes is one that is often brought down Republican forms of government. That's what happened in Germany in the 1930s as the fascists and communist groups fought in the streets of Berlin. And what Donald Trump has done through 4 years has encouraged his followers to engage in violence towards those who they feel antipathy toward, to beat up people at Trump rallies who might dissent from his political views. He encouraged the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia in the summer of 2017 when there was a so-called protest against the removal of Confederate statues. And what it turned into was a violent protest in which an innocent woman was killed. And Donald Trump said, well, there were good people on both sides. And this rhetoric, encouraging violence, promoting violence, has continued throughout his administration. And we saw yesterday where that leads. This is a president who is unfit for office. His psychological derangement is clear from his Twitter feed, as well as from his speeches. This has nothing to do with political ideology. One could be a staunch conservative or a radical liberal or somewhere in between and still understand how dangerous the mentality of Donald Trump is for a representative democracy. We have less than 2 weeks in this term, in this presidency. We assume there will be a peaceful transition, but this is a man who's in control of nuclear weapons, the ability to destroy human civilization in the matter of minutes. He is unfit for the presidency. There are 2 ways to remove him. The first is the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which will require the vice president and majority of the cabinet to submit a letter to Congress saying the president is mentally unfit. That is the most expeditious method, and that is the method that should be pursued immediately. But it is within the power of the vice president and the cabinet, one of which cabinet members resigned today, Ellyn. And I was very concerned about that, because she should instead have stayed and done her duty to urge the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, to invoke the 25th Amendment. And that is one way to remove a president, and that is really the only option we have at this point, at this late stage in his term. The other method is impeachment. Impeachment requires a majority vote of the House of Representatives, followed by a trial in the Senate and conviction only upon 2/3 of the senators voting to convict. Well, we've been that route, and Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, soon to become minority leader of the Senate, refused to have a real trial. And there were no witnesses, no evidence presented, simply arguments from constitutional law professors who purported to be experts, and then a vote along party lines. That was not a trial of Donald Trump, and the House of Representatives could impeach him again. I have urged that the House of Representatives do so. And indeed, a holder of office, of federal office in the United States, can be impeached and tried after leaving office. It happened once with the Secretary of War Belknap in 1876, impeached by the House, tried the Senate, but yes, acquitted by the Senate. Remember, it takes 2/3 of the Senate to convict. But still, an impeachment trial of Donald Trump would be in order, even after he leaves office. Why? Because impeachment bars the convicted person, if convicted by the Senate, from ever holding office again in the United States, holding federal office. Critically important when Donald Trump is considering a 2024 run for the presidency. Furthermore, much more important is accountability. It's critically important that we not ignore what happened in the past 4 years, but we hold those responsible for violating the law to the legal standard if they committed crimes, criminal conviction, or if they committed an impeachable offense justifying conviction by the Senate, then that is exactly what should happen. We should uncover the evidence of what happened. For example, how much did Donald Trump encourage what happened yesterday? We know about his public statements. We already have enough to convict him of sedition simply for what he said publicly. There's probably a lot more by way of private communications. We have a call to the Secretary of State of Georgia by Donald Trump, telling the Secretary of State that he ought to come up with 11,000 votes. That's called election fraud. I know all about election fraud. I grew up in Illinois. We all know about that. The Democrats and the Republicans competing in Illinois for which party could send their governor to the federal penitentiary first. Serious problem, though, all over America. And Donald Trump knew full well what he's doing when he's calling the Secretary of State of Georgia and saying, come up with 11,000 votes. That's solicitation of election fraud. That's a felony in the state of Georgia. And that's also a federal crime. We know that 2.5 weeks ago, President Trump had a meeting in the White House with Michael Flynn, so-called General Flynn, former General Flynn, who's been convicted of a felony. A felony of what? Lying about his contacts with the Russians. Think about this. A former national security advisor and general who is convicted of a felony for lying about his contacts with the Russians gets pardoned by the president. And then he's sitting in the president's office talking about doing what? Insurrection. Sending the United States military into Pennsylvania, Georgia, and other states, Arizona, with close elections. Supposedly close, not that close. I gotta say, Joe Biden won those states by tens of thousands of votes to redo the election. Well, the old-fashioned word for that is a military coup. And there's a statute that has to do with that. It's the sedition statute. That's a crime. And Donald Trump was sitting right there while they were talking about that. The list of crimes committed in this administration goes on. And I am going to urge the House of Representatives and the Senate to continue to investigate, and the Department of Justice to bring criminal charges where appropriate. Accountability is crucial, unless we want this to happen again. So right now, the focus of our conversation, I believe tonight, is mostly going to be on the mental fitness of this president. And perhaps he could plead an insanity defense if he were to be tried criminally. We could talk about that later. But the mental fitness of this president is a serious concern. And the 25th Amendment is our immediate mechanism for removing him from office if we can convince the vice president, Mike Pence, and the majority of the cabinet to do their duty to our country and remove him. So, Bandy, I'm going to ask you to introduce each of the speakers, and we'll have presentations. We'll have question and answer, and I'll make 1 or 2 comments. I prefer to listen rather than hear the rest of it, rather than hear myself talk. I'm sure that everyone here has much more to say than I do about this critically important matter. I have to say, great danger to our country unless we act to fix things now.
Thank you, Richard. We have long valued your partnership, and the legal perspective you bring is certainly relevant to behavioral management and mental health aspects, as we may go into later. But today we have reassembled the panel of top mental health experts that we had early in the pandemic. At least most of them. We're missing Dr. Susan Vaughn, and today Dr. Kevin Washington could join us, who was originally invited but could not the last time. And so we're very happy to have a panel of top mental health experts here to explain the current situation and how we have got here. First, we'll go in the same order as last time. Dr. John Zinner, Professor of Psychiatry at George Washington University. John, would you like to go ahead? Dr. Zinner?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi,
Perfect.
everybody. A lot has been said already by Richard, and we have a number of speakers, so I'm going to be brief and add what I think I can add as main points. It's actually very hard to prepare a talk on this topic right now because the events are running so quickly that anything one has planned the day before becomes obsolete in a way by today. And I'm struck with how much action is taking place with calls from many quarters for President Trump to resign, use of the 25th Amendment, any kind of removal of him is a current topic. What we're seeing now is our predictions coming true, as Bandy says, from the time that Trump started his presidency. I remember way back in 2017, I diagnosed him in the New Yorker as a narcissistic personality disorder and caught some flack for that because I was making a diagnosis, but it was clear that's what he had. And I think there's an underlying borderline personality organization, a la Kernberg, that he has as well. But all that leads to tremendous danger in him because of his narcissism, sadism, his capacity for narcissistic rage, his lack of empathy or capacity for remorse or lack of conscience. But I wanted to make some major points for me tonight that others might not make. Some people think that he's just a liar or a psychopath, and that these are not actually delusions. And I just want to clarify from all of my experience that I think that he is psychotic now, overtly psychotic, overtly paranoid delusions, brought out by a regression in his psychological system following losing the election. So he's gotten much more primitive. Same personality organization underlying it, but the quality of his projections and loss of reality testing is now taking over and posing a tremendous threat. So I wanted to make that point. The other point I want to make is that he will stop at nothing. You can't predict what he's going to do because he will absolutely stop at nothing, having no conscience. And he'll stop at nothing to avenge the wrong that he feels has been done to him, especially his feeling that he's been cheated. And if I can add a little dynamic formulation to it, why does he focus so much about being cheated? Why does he use that word so much? As a psychoanalyst, I think that he is so affected by his fantasy or delusion of being cheated because he was cheated. I think that he was cheated by his mother, whom I think abandoned him, he feels, when he was just 2 by the birth of Robert, and her subsequent absence due to illness and then remoteness for many years thereafter. So I think he's talking about feeling cheated of his mother's love. And you remember when he was speaking to a crowd in Pennsylvania, he thought in a joking way, he said, please love me, suburban women. I want your love. And I think he was speaking about 72 years after he originally felt that he had lost this love. So I do think that his feeling of being cheated and the delusion about it now is rooted in this feeling of being abandoned by his mother. One could almost have compassion for that, maybe if he was still 2, but it's hard to feel compassion at this point based on what he's doing with others. So I'm going to stop there and let others speak.
Thank you, John. We'll first have all the presenters present and then go to questions. So thank you for your patience. Next will be Dr. Ellyn Kaschak, Professor of Psychology at San Jose State University. Ellyn?
Thank you, Bandy. People, a deranged criminal, a racist, misogynist, filled with petty ambitions to be a dictator, a man whose cruelty has no boundaries, whose morality does not exist, holds the White House as a fortress from which to make war on the American people themselves. And still the rest of the government does not act to remove him and imprison him. The good people protest in fear and outrage. The House of Representatives impeaches, but the Senate is not permitted to act. Our allies express shock and dismay that the greatest democracy of our times is being destroyed slowly but surely from the inside. The people vote their wishes for him to be gone in significant majority. And still, those responsible for acting on the imminent danger do not act. The mental health experts weigh in over and over, insisting that the president is not competent and must be removed from office. Based on our expertise, we predict very closely how this presidency will unwind if there's no intervention. We try over and over to warn those who have the power to remove him. Yet they are so far deaf to our attempts to offer our expertise in defense of our country. We are speaking once again, and today they must hear us. And many say that they knew it all along without us. As I have lived through the feminist movement, I recognize the way we are dealt with. At first, we're too radical, too alarmist, and at the last, we are irrelevant. We are just saying what everybody already knows. This is the spin by means of which we are marginalized. Today, we are no longer on the margins, as all of our most dire predictions have come to fruition. I'm here to tell you that this is not over. Any competent psychologist or psychiatrist knows this. Any competent politician should know this. Anyone paying attention should know this today. Today, we once again call upon those in power to listen and to act. He's not done yet. The worst may be yet to come. You must invoke the 25th Amendment before Trump shows the entire world how dangerous he really is. The one thing psychology did not signal clearly to all of us is that no one would act in response to our concerns. It's almost too late. In addition to the current emergency, and to avoid its recurrence in the future, I have already recommended in a recent article a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but I want to elaborate and break that down a little more today. In addition, I would recommend the following. Establish an Office of Psychology at the level of the Surgeon General. Second, that office would be responsible for policy, consultation, and advising the president or vice president directly. These are dreams of mine, let's say. Next, an internal psychology and peace corps to deal with the trauma to the people, which is going to be paramount after this president leaves office. That's not going to be the end of it, as we all know as mental health experts. Also, we must pay serious attention to the psychology of the Trumpians and deal with them in a different way than we've been doing, which has been mostly dismissive. So I'm trying here to introduce a broader model than just using psychology as a medical treatment. I believe also we should be teaching psychology at lower grades. Education works. I know as a gender expert and sometimes consultant to international courts that reconciliation projects, that truth heals, empathy heals, witnessing and respectful hearing heals. We are now called upon to invoke these interventions where we never expected to, in the non-United States of America. Sorry, I have one more sentence. Finally, I think that we have sadly learned not to depend so much on the politicians as on the people themselves. It is the people who have acted decisively, who have turned the government with the elections, with grassroots movements, and with respect for each other. As mental health professionals, I hope we deal more with those people and that we continue the fight for the 25th Amendment and to affect government officials as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellyn. Just for everyone's information, we had actually planned this session to be introduction of our next phase, which was to form a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the new administration. We ended up expediting this meeting, and therefore I'm glad you brought it up. and I hope that we can continue this conversation. So next will be Dr. Edwin Fisher, Professor of Behavioral and Public Health at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Ed?
Start over again. Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you all for being here. I know we've all had a stressful day and a half, and I think it's good that so many people are willing to gather and consider these things. I want to talk about two things. One is I want to add as a complement to the talk about Trump's psychology, some discussion of the social context that he creates for himself and how dangerous that is. And then I want to raise some questions about what next. So let me start with the social context. We predicted, and it was very predictable, that Trump, as dependent as he is on the idolatry of those around him, would come to the end that he has come, which is that he is now down to a last few stragglers who are still sticking by him. Lord knows who actually his confidants are at this point. It may be the chief of staff, it may be his family, but it's not at all clear. Perhaps Rudy Giuliani. We see this as a common pattern with people who are very narcissistic and also very dependent on others. We saw Trump's dependence in that cabinet meeting a few years ago that made you cringe. You cringed for the cabinet members who were just embarrassing themselves with their fulsome praise of Master President. But then you also cringed at the thought of a human being who would actually find that to be valuable compliments. How could somebody sit there and take that kind of praise and gain from it? It's hard to imagine. So that extreme dependence and pressure on those around to confirm my value, to tell me that I'm wonderful, gradually is its own destruction, because gradually people can't take it anymore and they fall off, or their praise and their support does not meet the demands on them, and they're excluded. And of course, we saw in some respects, the final example of that yesterday when Pence and his family were there in the Capitol, and Trump sent his mob down there, and nobody in the White House gave Pence any warning. Nobody in the White House had any interest in Pence's welfare. So that results in this very, very dangerous isolation of Trump, where the more desperate he is for confirmation, the more he puts demands on others, the more those demands drive people away, the more desperate he becomes, and he ends up alone, literally, if not figuratively, or figuratively, if not literally, and certainly psychologically, and very, very dangerous then, with no break on his action. Some softening of that. I heard General Powell on some morning shows this morning talking about how the military does not follow illegal orders. And so the thought that Trump could just tell the generals to do anything he damn please, and that they would immediately do it, we're apparently safe from that. But that does make him very, very dangerous, and again reinforces the imperative of the 25th Amendment to excise him quickly. I just want to close by talking a little bit about what next. I think we all know that when you try to mollify bullies, it does not make them calm down. It just enrages them or inflames them. And I think that we need not to deal with the insurrection yesterday as if it was people expressing a different point of view that needs to be respected. We need, as a society, to act strongly in condemnation of what happened yesterday. I'm not sure exactly how we should do that. Are criminal sanctions the remedy? I'm not sure. I would point out, I had a lot of experience years ago in tobacco wars. And what really turned the tide on the tobacco companies was, one, recognizing the addictive nature of cigarettes and how not only were they killing people, but they were addicting people to kill them. And two, how deceit was part of their game. And I'm wondering whether in the post-Trump months, hopefully his deceit will come to the fore, his ties to the Russians will come to the fore, etc. And also the hurt, the hundreds of thousands of lives that he's taken through COVID will come to the fore. And maybe that maybe that recognition of hurt and deceit will help turn at least some of the Trump supporters away from him and toward some process of reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That was very helpful. Now, last but not least is Dr. Kevin Washington, Professor of Psychology and Sociology at Grambling State University. Kevin?
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here, be a part of this process. We're in this moment, at this time, experiencing something that is unprecedented. Some posit that it is something that could have been predicted. Many of us recognize the behavior patterns of those who have a psychopathic personality disorder. Dr. Bobby Wright, Black psychologist, talked about racism and racist as being psychopathic. I want to also recognize W.B. Du Bois, who talks about double consciousness, that there are many in this country who are experiencing something that goes beyond President Donald Trump because of the double reality that was witnessed in watching how a population was allowed to be admitted into the Capitol building and to wreak havoc on the political process, while seeing the same behavior of unrest take place in the summer of 2020, and watching riot gear or facilitated officers gather and release pepper spray and rubber bullets on the population. And that the same thing did not take place yesterday. Yes, it is easy to reduce the conversation to Trump. However, it is important to recognize what he has been able to market, what he's been able to utilize as a major tool that symbolizes something more than simply his psychological unrest, but it is some type of unrest that exists within a space, a country, that needs to wrestle with the serious issues of everyone and how they are impacted by this. I have been on phone calls all day. I've been texting and emailing all day with people that look like me, that share the experience of being African-American. And the question is, why is it that the treatment that has been meted out against the population for simply sneezing, or watching George Floyd have allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill and his life snuffed away from him, and this population told this country that they were coming, yet there was not the same positioning of a posture of defense against this populace. As a matter of fact, people came into the Capitol and people took selfies with the police officers. That is a painful psychological moment. And so we have this conversation about the person and personality, but I want to suggest that the rhetoric of the president, the fourth of the president, is in large part tied to the strong racial ideology that is woven into this country, that it is this racialized views are part of the conscious and subconscious reality of a population that deems one group to be superior and another one to be inferior. That the language that he utilized was reminiscent of the physical enslavement language of a population when he said, "Let's make America great again." We must recognize that that conversation, that statement is a reminder that there had been, prior to his presidency, there had been a president that had been Barack Obama, a Black man had been in that position. And so the conversation was that our country had been taken away. And the question becomes, taken away by whom and for what purpose? So the rhetoric of restoration of this country, the nativism, the build the wall, the nationalism, America first conversation is one that is a part of the historical narrative that we all learn within a school system within this country. And so I submit that he's also a victim of that system, as he is a victim of, as Dr. Zinner mentioned, some elements of parenting flaws or parenting concerns. Because the language has been utilized to advance a construct of one group being superior to another, and to watch that actually get played out in this country on January 6th, when these riotous individuals were able to be escorted back to their buses, to go back to their homes, to go out and eat and do whatever they were going to do afterwards, when in reality, we recognize that had it been a different population, had it been Black or brown individuals, that would have been much bloodshed in the streets of Washington, D.C. So the unrest that occurs, the idea of the democracy of a country, is alarming to some. I want to submit to you that there's a population in this country right now that is still wrestling with the idea that they have never been seen as human in this space, and have seen it be further revealed that they are less than human in this moment right now, that they have never been seen as citizens and still feel an alienation or estrangement from the inclusion in this country. That is a psychological hell to live in. See, the idea of the living in a space of having to work from can to can't in the morning, some say working from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, to be beaten, sodomized, and dehumanized, is a psychologically disruptive phenomenon. To see your loved ones lynched and castrated, and to see their body parts be disseminated across various spaces, where some even suggested that the body parts would be placed in jars in the by the cash register on the only store in town, so that others would see that particular body part there, to know that if you get out of line, this will happen to you. That was trauma that had occurred to a population years ago. And I want to submit to you that that same trauma is occurring today. So we don't have the luxury of post-traumatic slave disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, because there's no post moment, that we have this ongoing traumatic experience from the ideology of an individual who was able to harvest, to be able to cultivate, and to market this notion of white supremacy and white terrorism. I close with saying that we are suggesting that there is a falling away of individuals that support him. I would submit that 74 million people in this country have strong support for this individual. And the individuals who are on this call right now, at some level, having some support for this particular ideology. The real challenge then for us is to begin to look at how we can peel back the layers of racial trauma that he was able to bring to the surface. And I think it's a good thing sometimes to bring certain things to the surface to begin to facilitate a healing, a recognition of this fact that we do have some illnesses. Racism, I said in graduate school, and I was graded poorly for saying so, is a mental disorder. And it was mentioned earlier about, I said, what does it mean to have sight among the blind? As Bandy assemble individuals together to say that this person, President Trump, is bad for the country, to be able to see, to have foresight to see this day yesterday was soon to come. Well, the same thing happened years ago when I could see that racism is a mental disorder. And the same thing that I had my 79-year-old mother to ask me this morning, she says, could they not see that he was going to do this in this moment? She's also an educator and a behavioral specialist as well. And so she could clearly see. And the question becomes, why can't others not see that? In part because it was the ideology that people bought into, rather than examining closely the behaviors that he was exhibiting. So I submit then that a part of the work, the next steps, is to engage in this process of reconciliation and healing by bringing out the levels of truth that all people have. And that is the point that Dr. Lee is mentioning. It's a part of the work that we're saying that we have to do, is that in order for true healing to take place, recognition of the pain of everyone has to be brought to the forefront. And that the human trafficking experience of African people have not been dealt with. The removal of Native Americans, the Trail of Tears has not been dealt with. The Yellow Peril has not been dealt with. There are years of pain that's been created by the same ideology that 45 that Trumpian was able to create in this country and bring to the forefront. A question was asked to me today is, why is it that Colin Kaepernick was deemed to be unpatriotic when he kneeled for the flag, but those who disrupted the process yesterday have not received the same type of reprimand largely in this country? That's a double consciousness reality. The healing work has to be done. The reconciliation is possible only when people are willing to deal with the truth that everyone has about a situation. And so I submit that I am looking forward to a further discussion about how we can engage in true healing where everyone's truth is brought to the table, and not simply cast off this particular process on a person, but to begin to ask the question, what role did I play in this process? And we all have played a role in this process at some level. And I'm guilty, as well as others, for either not speaking up or speaking up at the wrong time. And we all have a role to play. So I thank you all for listening. I yield the rest of the time for a healthy discussion about the what next. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Washington, for bringing that very important perspective. I'd just like to mention to everyone that we have always considered Donald Trump in the context of society. His election itself was an indication. He was a barometer of the state of mental health in society. And we have also put out a statement that urging people to consider racism as a societal mental disorder that Donald Trump has obviously exacerbated and allowed to express itself in ways that had not been possible in recent history. So now we can move on to discussion. If you look at the lower part of your screen, there will be a participants icon. You can click on it and there will be an option to raise your hand to the right. And please unmute yourself and ask your question when you are called upon.
Bandy, it's Richard Painter here. I just want to ask that we separate two sets of issues. I want to have questions on both. One is the psychiatric condition of Donald Trump, the president, who until January 20 at noon is going to have control of nuclear weapons and the ability to destroy human civilization in a matter of minutes. And should he continue, or should he be removed pursuant to the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, which is probably the only option at this point, given that impeachment was a fiasco. It was not handled appropriately by the House. They didn't prepare an impeachment case investigating everything that he could have been impeached for. And of course, the Senate didn't even have an impeachment trial. So 25th Amendment is the only choice there, and it's all about the psychiatric condition of one man, the President of the United States. Is he capable of doing his job? The other issue, and it's equally important, is about the psychiatric condition of the followers, the people who put him there. Because that's what happens when you have a dictatorship take over. It happened in Germany in the 1930s. Hitler would not have gained power without those crowds at Nuremberg and other places cheering him on. And the psychiatry of racism, hatred, that mass psychiatry, the dangers of the psychosis spreading to the masses is a very, very important topic. And we ought to talk about that as well. I hope we could just focus on each of these problems separately, because one of these problems we have to deal with for the next, 2 weeks or so until we can get rid of this man, and hope that we are alive on the 20th of January at noon when Joseph Biden is sworn in as president of the United States. The other problem, the psychiatry, the psychosis that brought him here, and the people who supported him and who we saw at the Capitol building yesterday will live with us, and the racism and the other psychiatric aberrations. And we should talk about that as well. They're two separate issues. So maybe we could talk about one and then the other, but I hope we can address both in the question and answer.
Yes, thank you for making that distinction, Richard. In fact, the reason for assembling today is because of the urgent issue of removing essentially the head of this entire movement, and that, in fact, removing him from office and containing him would play a large part in containing his followers and placing us on a path toward healing. So, keeping that in mind, we can go to questions, please.
Great. Our first question will come from Laura. If you can please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Hi, thank you everybody. It was great to hear all of your perspectives. While we've been on this call, Trump put out a video message basically saying that the people who broke the law did the wrong thing and they'll pay for it. He will have a peaceful transfer of power, and that all he was doing was trying to legally, pursue, make sure that the election was legally conducted. So I have a couple of questions about that. I'd like to hear your perspective. Obviously he's doing that because he's concerned about the legal ramifications. He's trying to divorce himself from the legal ramifications that everybody are talking about right now of inciting those riots. But do you think he's capable of sticking with that for 2 weeks and constraining his behaviors in general, given the threats that he's seeing to himself personally? So will that be a container on his behaviors and the things that we're concerned about for the next 2 weeks? And the second part of that is that if he does that, he's basically betraying all of his followers, and your thoughts about how they would respond to that kind of betrayal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone on the panel like to answer that question?
I'll just respond to part of it. I think that it would be a tremendous mistake to see anything that Trump does at this point as reflecting any kind of true contrition or sincerity. He is clearly playing his hand however he thinks best. And as has been noted time and again over the last 4 years, his impulsivity is such that what he might say that sounds nice this evening might be totally contravened tomorrow if he sees some other opportunity to advance himself. So I think he needs to be treated as totally untrustworthy and scurrilous. Then the issue is how best to contain him.
I'll weigh in on that also. I think it's not possible to contain him except by the means that we've discussed. Clearly, in this sort of psychopathology, he is not going to contain himself I would suggest also that he did not voluntarily issue that statement, that probably Pence and some other people pressured him into doing it as, I'm afraid to say, an alternative to invoking the 25th Amendment. The other thing I just want to mention concerning what we're calling his pathology at different levels in this talk is that I've always tried to get the people that do diagnosis to recognize that these are STDs. These are socially transmitted diseases, racism, sexism, and so on. I think it would be fantastic if we had a section like that in the DSM that talked about how society creates some of these, not how they're created in the home.
Thank you. Next question.
Great. Our next question will come from the Zoom participant with the name Resistor Girl. If you can please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much for having this and so many of these. They've been so helpful. I just had a question. I watched John Bolton on a television program today. And as you probably know, both Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer tried to contact Mike Pence and sat on hold for about 25 minutes, and then he did not take the call today. They wanted to speak to him about invoking the 25th Amendment. So apparently what John Bolton was saying is that it would not be a good idea because we would then have two people, because of the way it works. It would sort of go back and forth because Trump could dispute it even if Pence invoked it. And then we would actually have two people who would have the authority and the rights to act as the president. I was wondering if somebody could explain that. Is that correct? And just give a little more insight into how that would actually work. Thank you.
I'll jump in that as the lawyer. Given the fact that we have less than 2 weeks in the term, I believe that if the letter was submitted by the vice president, majority of the cabinet to Congress, that would pretty much take Trump out of action through January 20, and we wouldn't have to at least worry about him blowing up the world. We have a lot of other issues to deal with. But bottom line is that I have urged the 25th Amendment be invoked because at this late stage, we would not go through the back and forth where the Congress would have to ratify the decision to remove him from office.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next question.
Great. Our
Well,
next.
I'll ask you to keep them short since we have very little time left.
Yes. So the next question will come from Zoom user Lonice. If you can please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My concern was yesterday that it appeared that crowd was out to actually assassinate members of Congress, and Trump actually sent them there to do that. How concerned are we about a repeat of the 1960s again, when there was so much political assassinations that were occurring in the country, repeating itself again? Thank you.
Would anyone like to answer?
I could jump in again if you like. Just to say, I think the example from the 1960s shows that it's not the right-wing people that get violently attacked or assassinated. And so my concern would be about the new president and vice president, and I hope that they're protected well. Nobody's going to do this to Trump.
Thank you. Shall we go to the next question?
Great. Our next question will come from Michael Ross. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I just had a quick comment and a question, which is, I know Richard Painter is concerned about the resignation of the cabinet member today. From my understanding of the procedure of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, Pence does not need to instigate the proceedings, kind of has to come as a group effort collectively. And he just needs to be convinced to be on board by the cabinet. And this cabinet members, whose name I now forget, her resignation will only be effective on Monday. So we have a few days for hopefully this to be discussed between cabinet members, and hopefully she appears to be maybe sympathetic to putting this in motion. The other comment is the idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee is very noble. It's a very human idea, but I know some of us, including myself, will not be reconciled until this man, Donald Trump, is either rotting in jail or receiving good treatment in a secure psychiatric facility. And I don't know if that will happen, but what can we do at this point? Perhaps each one of us here can petition or write or tweet the Georgia Attorney General to put in motion legal proceedings against Donald Trump with regard to the voting fraud that was mentioned earlier. But I think we all need to give it a push. And if anyone has a commentary about that or how to make it even more facilitated at this point. Thank you.
Okay, I might answer a little bit about the 25th Amendment because I attended and held conferences a number of times with the drafter of the amendment, Dean John Farrick at the Fordham School of Law. And he was actually dismayed at the common misconception of the amendment that the vice president is not meant to lead the charge, as you say, but to be the last stage of agreeing to what the cabinet or other body have agreed upon based on, surprisingly, medical data, based on what doctors may say or what psychiatrists especially he felt would be important in elucidating conditions that people are not familiar with. And then they would pressure the vice president. I might just add that the vice president requires mental capacity to be able to take on the position then, since this is about capacity as well. And so we could begin to question that if he refused. But anyhow, that's from my perspective. Anyone else would like to answer other portions?
The only thing I would add is that this cabinet does not have a lot of expertise in medicine, certainly in the field of psychiatry. This is a cabinet handpicked by Donald Trump, and somebody needs to show leadership and get the ball rolling here. And Mike Pence is certainly not my favorite person to show leadership and get everyone together and say, we've got a problem. But then again, Secretary Pompeo is not necessarily a good choice either. I filed a Kaschak complaint against him with Professor Claire Finkelstein at the University of Pennsylvania. We filed a Kaschak complaint against him because of what he did during the convention. He's given a speech from Jerusalem touting the Republican National Committee. I'm not sure that's what diplomatic missions are all about. We can go through the cabinet and see who might show leadership here. But maybe the vice president is our only hope for the next 13 days. And I just want to get through January 20 without this man blowing up the whole world. I mean, that's really, it's about the nukes for the next 13 days. And then we can sort out the rest of the psychosis that got us into this jam to begin with.
Thank you, Richard. Shall we go to the next question?
Yes, our next question will come from Mary Webb. If you can please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to pick up on what the discussion has been so far. First of all, Elaine Chao is Mitch McConnell's wife. So maybe there is a reason that she has, has decided to withdraw as a cabinet member. She might be the person. But if Pence is not the person to understanding how the 25th Amendment works. I understand that there is a group of people that could be appointed by the Congress to intervene, and that you would only need a couple of maybe one or two cabinet members. What I heard just most recently was that Pence didn't think it would work to do the 25th Amendment. So how do we collectively or individually reach the best person or persons when they're already discussing this option and we think it's the best option for everybody concerned? It seems to me we need a collective effort as mental health professionals to expedite that. So maybe this question is addressed to Richard or Bandy or anybody else who can guide us as a group to what is the best course of action. Because we need to get this guy out of office because he's too dangerous.
Richard, do you wish to go first?
Well, I think to get him out of office between now and the 20th, I mean, that is the first priority. And that's why, in the beginning of our conversation, we want to separate two different issues. We need to focus on his psychiatric condition and the risks. And the risks are really in two areas. One, the chance that he could start a war. And second, that he could attempt a coup and taking over our government. What was talked about in the White House in an Oval Office meeting 2.5 weeks ago or so, and I wrote another op-ed with Professor Finkelstein at the Just Security website. It's there on the Sedition Act and what happens. That's clearly a crime. What happened there, and Michael Flynn suggesting we send the military into different states in order to redo the election. This is a serious crime. He could try that. He could try some sort of military coup. I don't think it's going to succeed because great damage to our country. I mean, we've been embarrassed all over the world by what happened in the Capitol building yesterday. So the focus right now needs to be on his psychiatric condition and the dangers he can pose for the next 13 days or so. And if we stay laser focused on that, we can perhaps convince the vice president and the cabinet that Donald Trump needs to go on vacation for 2 weeks. And that's it. I mean, it's a mental health leave. That's all this is about. He needs it, and it's time for that. And then we'll sort out the rest. Impeaching him, which can be done after he leaves office, to hold him accountable, bar him from future office, criminal prosecution of anybody who's committed crimes and so forth. We can sort all that out later. But I want to get from here to the 20th of January without a major catastrophe for the United States.
I agree with that. And I would say that I find hope in the fact that Nancy Pelosi has come forth recommending the 25th Amendment. She's usually extraordinarily cautious, but since she has come forth with that, there's a lot she could do, including form the other body, as you said, consisting of half medical professionals, the way they have proposed the legislation. And she could hold hearings. She could hold hearings about his mental state, discredit him, talk about how much the 25th Amendment is necessary. Plenty of us are ready to testify. Also, impeachment proceedings could happen at the same time. They have great value in setting limits, in behavioral control. And as Richard said, we're just concerned about behavioral containment until January 20th. Okay, next question, please.
Great. Our next question will come from John. I believe Rudolph is the last name. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much for the time. I'm a cardiologist, not a psychiatrist. I'll be very brief. Most of the questions have dealt with what other people, either in the government or in the public, should do. What we need to do is get the position of Dr. Lee, Dr. Painter, Dr. Zinner, Mr. Painter and so forth before the leaders as quickly, effectively, and prominently as possible to start moving either the 25th Amendment or impeachment or both. There are 200 and something participants on this call. If we each kick in $100, we can get a full page ad in the New York Times tomorrow or the next day outlining Dr. Lee's prescient, in my opinion, opinions. But I agree with Mr. Painter completely that our only object here right now is to get to January 21st without a nuclear catastrophe. All of the political stuff can be dealt with later, but we've got to get rid of him now. And what we need to do is be as public, as prominent, and as vocal as possible. And I'll kick in the first $100 immediately. But we've got to get him out. Thank you for your time.
I'll kick in the second.
Richard Painter here. I'll just jump in on one comment. I pointed this out in an essay I wrote with Nora Meisen in Bandy's last book on the danger of Donald Trump, dangerous case of Donald Trump. And we talked about 25th Amendment, and Congress can specify alternatives. There are alternatives, and that's the point of commission. I mean, they should have done that. That's what Nora Meisen and I suggested in that essay in Bandy's book. And I talked about that in the conference you had in Washington. But they never got around to it. I guess they're busy fussing around with other things, or maybe it wouldn't get past the Senate because Mitch McConnell was just genuflecting to this president until about one day ago. But the bottom line is that they could pass a provision, I guess, in the new Congress very quickly and set up a commission and determine that he is mentally unfit. The problem is we don't have much time to play around with between now and the 20th. And this should have been dealt with a lot sooner than this. And that's the point Nora Meisen and I made in that essay. We really need to have a commission or something, some other mechanism. The 25th Amendment sets that up as a possibility. We should do that rather than thinking that the cabinet appointed by a president with psychiatric conditions, that somehow the cabinet is going to be a bunch of experts on psychiatry along with the vice president. And, I hope they'll do the right thing and invoke the 25th. But we've got to fix this situation pretty quickly. And I think the alternative of a commission it really ought to be pursued, at least in the future. If we want to try that next week, okay, let's give it a whirl. But we don't have much time to play with.
Yes, that was an excellent suggestion by Richard and Norman Eisen. Now we're out of time, but we'll take just a couple more questions since there are many. The rest of you, please feel free to write in your questions in the chat, and we will collect them and try to answer them electronically. And the gentleman who proposed a full page ad, we're willing to consider it. If you can email it to us, we can send it out to the mailing list for this session. Next question.
Great. The next question will come from Gary. Please go ahead.
Yeah, seems like there's been enough crimes committed that there could be a warrant for an arrest put out. And if that arrest warrant is carried out, then he's in a secure facility. A 5150 goes into order, and so on. And that whole process of keeping him secure and keeping us secure is put into place. So I guess that's a legal question. Maybe Richard, help me out with that.
Well, there's not a lot of options at this point. I mean, I think this president, if he is going to do anything that's unconstitutional, we're going to have to go to the courts. And that's really all that can be done, seek an injunction. I suggested before the certification that the Speaker of the House of Representatives be camping at the Supreme Court ready to seek an injunction if he wanted to send in the military or do something crazy. I believe that we're going to be okay. I don't know how you get an injunction against the president starting nuclear war. but we really need to have a mechanism for removing a man like this. And what we've got right now isn't working, to rely on a cabinet appointed by the president to remove the president. And as I said, that's not what's required in the 25th Amendment. It's a default option, but Congress needs to enact something better. And that's what I point out in the book chapter I wrote for Bandy's book with Norman Eisen. So we are where we are. Let's try and get through in the next 13 days.
Okay, thank you. The next question, the next and last question.
Great. So the next one will come from Ashley Moss Pham. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So the two questions that I have. One is I'm confused because I thought that I heard earlier in this forum that Colin Powell had assured the public that Donald Trump no longer has access to military options at this point in time, even in the absence of the 25th or the absence of impeaching him. Did I misunderstand what I heard? Can someone clarify that?
But does he have military options?
Yes, I thought that Colin Powell had said he can't. Someone had said that or had.
Well, the military, they cannot obey an illegal order. And, I think we could have a separate conversation about military law. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law at the University of Pennsylvania, and they have a lot of military law experts there. Mm-hmm. And that's a separate conversation to have. And it's critically important to have that conversation with respect to this president or any future president. We should have done it years ago. The idea that the president could order us to go to war is a very, very dangerous situation when there's no consent of Congress to go to war. The founders made it clear in the Constitution that Congress declares war, not the president alone. Bottom line is he has military options. That's where we are. He's commander in chief. And unless we constrain those military options through laws enacted by Congress, to prevent a president from getting us into a war unilaterally without Congress declaring war, we're gonna be in this situation. But now we've been in that before. I mean, Lyndon Johnson got us all messed up in Vietnam for years before he ever went to Congress to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. We've had other presidents, misrepresent facts to Congress to get us into wars, and we've gone through this before about the war powers, and we need to revisit that. We've been very, very lucky that Donald Trump hasn't gotten us into a major military confrontation. And let's just hope in the next 13, 12 days, whatever, he doesn't come up with something to distract everyone from what he's done.
Definitely. But my question is, just to clarify, within the next 13 days, I agree with you that laws have to be changed and that has to be addressed in a systemic way. But for the next 13 days, isn't it true? Don't you think that he's discredited himself enough with enough people that just like when Nixon was in office, and I think it was the Secretary of Defense who told his underlings, don't take any orders from him without going through me first. Do you think that our military would do anything that he requested at this point?
Well, if I may jump in terms of evaluating dangerousness, it doesn't diminish much of his danger because of the way that the nuclear system is set up. If you read Daniel Ellsberg's book on nuclear weapons and just how easy it is for nuclear weapons to go off and how little constraints there are against a president and how often mistakes happen. With this erratic president, I would say it's still a huge danger. Okay.
Between what should be and what is, we should not have a military that will obey the president's orders no matter what. We should have rules, statutes in place, and controls. We don't have them right now. And we could spend the next couple of years figuring out what those controls ought to be. But between now and January 20th at noon, we are at a great risk because the understanding of the military is if the commander-in-chief gives an order, you follow it. And that is going to be the presumption. That is a very powerful presumption, and it's going to be hard to overcome. And I would pray, I'd hope that our military would stand down if given such an order. But I'm not confident that's what's going to happen. And Congress has had ample opportunity to constrain the power of the president to start wars. And the War Powers Act is not sufficient. We need to revisit that. Let's try to get through the next 12 days, but 13 days. But the bottom line is this president needs to be removed. He is extremely dangerous, and I'm not confident the military is going to stop him and refuse to obey his orders if he wants to start something with Iran or with China or any other.
Yes. Okay, can I ask one follow-up question? It's related.
Please be very quick.
I will. If that is the case, that we are in imminent danger of this psychopath doing something crazy, what can members of the general public do to assist you as experts in accomplishing what you feel must be done?
I believe one of the members of the coalition put out a petition on change.org for calling for a psychiatric evaluation by the public and addressing us. Just for your information, we have submitted a request for an involuntary psychiatric evaluation to the federal police, a federal judge, members of Congress, and Mike Pence. We're in the midst of doing that tonight and tomorrow. And that is regardless of the rest of the processes that he needs immediately to be contained.
Can you share that with everybody so that we can share it on social media and get community involvement behind that?
Yes, I'll see if it can be sent out by email.
Thank you.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the speakers for on sudden notice and for all your support. Good night.